In 2011, Joyce Kelly, Marilyn Roach, and Lynn O'Connell, of the Historical Society of Watertown, and Kenneth Rand, met with me at the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery, Watertown, Massachusetts. On February 8, 2012, I began recording all of the names noted on headstones, as well as adding pictures of the markers to findagrave.com. That was the initial goal of the project. When that task was done, I expanded the scope by designing a spreadsheet and recording the information listed in the burial notebook. A copy of the book was given to me by Mr. Rand years ago. He made a copy when it was held at the Calvary Cemetery in Waltham. He also had a burial map from 1954 that he had updated. That book began in 1885 and ended in 1947. The notebook listed the names and lot numbers of 6,383 people. That notebook did not list any burials between 1854 and 1884. It soon became obvious that my original estimate of 12,000 burials and about 5,000 lots, within less than 7 acres, was greatly understated. The preface notes my methodology that resulted in my posting the names of 23,951 people who are buried less than 7 acres in the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery. I located the pre-June 24, 1882, burial books at the Archdiocese of Boston's archives, in Braintree, Massachusetts. The burial records from June 24, 1882 to December 1884 are missing, as well as August 1895, January to May 1911, December and October 1916, and January to April 1918. The archives also had the records of lots sold. The first 2 lots were sold on April 11, 1854. The burials were done that same day. To locate any burials during those missing periods, I reviewed the death certificates of Boston, Cambridge, Watertown, Belmont, Somerville, and Chelsea. The final spreadsheet of burials included those buried but not recorded in the burial book. The spreadsheet revealed many young deaths and sufferings for all. I desired to learn about the people buried in this cemetery. I began listing information in my spreadsheet that was noted on the death records. That included causes of death, occupations, place of residence, death, birth, spouses' names, maiden names, parents' names, and parents' places of birth. The data validated my fear of great hardship for this first generation of adult Irish Catholic immigrants and their children. From 1854 to 1881, of the 15,562 burials, 49% died before age 6. The spreadsheet revealed that it was not unusual to have overburying in the lots. Often those were infants or young children who were buried with teenagers or adults. During that time, there were no burial vaults and the ground was sandy and porous. The majority of the people buried resided in the North End, Charlestown, and East Boston sections of Boston. The next most common place of residence was Cambridge, followed by Somerville. 99.5% of the cemetery lots were sold by the end of 1864. The lots were primarily purchased by people who were born in Ireland. It appears likely that the residents of the new Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery immigrated around the time of the 1847 First Great Irish Famine or are their descendants. The book is 221 pages. The following segments are a partial representation of the people buried there. They depict a condensed version of their hardships. I prepared many charts that in various comparative data. A sample appears in this video. They're expanded stories and all of the charts can be seen in the book, without cost, at archive.org. Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery. The 23,000 plus burials, recorded on the spreadsheet, have been posted to findagrave.com. Cemetery research in an inactive cemetery can be lonely. I was lucky to have a blonde coyote with me from 2012 to 2014. She used to spend the days at the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery. Late in the day, utilizing a breach in the wall, she headed over to the Mount Auburn Cemetery to make looking for food. Her resting place was at the far end of the cemetery. It was not her lair. There is only one entrance to the property. If I saw her, I would remain toward the front. I think the next two pictures are cute as she is looking at me like I'm a potential meal. In late 2014, told by a staff member of the Mount Auburn Cemetery that a blonde coyote had been hit by a car on Mount Auburn Street. The Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery is less than 7 acres, with almost 24,000 people buried there. It appears to me that the Catholic cemetery is a desert within an oasis. The Mount Auburn Cemetery is 170 acres with about 110,000 burials. That is 640 burials for each acre. The statistic for the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery is 3,429 burials per acre. During my research, I located 2 sets of great-grandparents on both sides of my family. I was not aware that they were buried there. Neither of the lots has grave markers. 9% of the lots were sold between 1854 and 1864. I am aware that well before 1900 both families had the financial ability to place a marker. The records at the Middlesex County Registry of Deeds indicate that on February 13, 1854, Stephen C. Stone and his wife and Stone conveyed 6.84 acres of land located at what is now the end of Cottage Street, East Watertown, Massachusetts. It was conveyed to Patrick Denvier of Charlestown, Massachusetts. The price was $4,146. Mr. Denvier was a prominent undertaker from Charlestown. He was a member of the Charitable Irish Society for 61 years, as well as being active in the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Mr. Denvier held the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery sales book until June 23, 1882, when the last of the 5,321 lots was sold. 99.5% of the lots were sold by December 21, 1864. The second famine in Ireland began in 1879. Therefore the lots had been gone years before. It is safe to say that the people buried at Catholic Mount Auburn were either born in Ireland before 1864, or their descendants. Half a century later, the use of a straw to purchase land for another Catholic cemetery would have been a wise choice. However, the Archdiocese took a direct approach. That year the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston attempted to purchase land for another cemetery. The land was near Cambridge's Brattle Street, home to the wealthy and intelligentsia. The Cambridge Sentinel, June 15, 1907, page 8 noted, "We do not think that the attitude of the Board of Aldermen on the question of the Catholicity will settle the question from the Catholic point of view. They are convinced that in asking that the Coolidge estate be privileged for that purpose, they are only asking for what should have been granted years ago." The persistent attitude of the objectors at the recent aldermanic hearing disclosed one fact at least: the sight of funeral processions was obnoxious to them. Whether this argues a deep reverence for the divine will, or a strong moral courage in contemplating the inevitable, we leave them to ponder upon. Such a reason for objection is not worthy of the cold respect of a passing glance. If the residents along Brattle Street can give no better reason for opposing this cemetery, the sooner they are dismissed consideration of the subject the better. The location is fitted for no other purpose. Its destiny was marked off years ago when the Mount Auburn and Cambridge cemeteries were located there. It would be impossible to exploit such a neighborhood for real estate purposes. It is fitted for a burial place for the dead. The Catholic burial place in the city adequate for their need. They were ignored in the early days when cemeteries were apportioned to the sections in the city. What they should have received, then they ask for now. They are in earnest. They will insist that their just claims be considered, and a refusal to grant them justice will be remembered at the time. Continued on the next slide. Cambridge Sentinel November 30, 1907, page 8, noted, "It will also be remembered that no reasonable objection was raised to the project of a cemetery where the Catholics could bury their dead in consecrated ground within the confines of their own city." The opposition of the Brattle Street residents and their puerile reasons for opposing the project heartily favored by the members, their church numbering about 5% of our population, were too selfish and illiberal to be worthy of serious consideration. The objections to the sight of funeral processions filing by their doors on the way to the cemetery did not bespeak a very enlightened conception of the solemnity of such a scene. People truly Christian are led into a higher frame of mind by such spectacles. This objection merely displayed the sham culture of the Brattle Street element. No one ventured to argue at the hearings in City Hall. However, on August 14, 1909, the Cambridge Tribune announced that the area had been purchased and was being divided into 250 house lots. It was one of the few remaining large plots of land in the city. This sale marked the end of the Coolidge estate. Cambridge Tribune, August 14, 1909, page 7. Headline, "Now being divided into house lots, some have been purchased." Article, "The Terry Proposition." One of the few remaining large plots of land in the city will soon be a thing of the past, for the Coolidge estate, bordered by Coolidge Avenue and the Metropolitan Park Reservation, is being plotted into house lots by Surveyor Mason, preparatory to being put upon the market. The estate is to be divided into some 200 or 250 lots, each lot to contain at least 5,000 square feet. T.H. Raymond is in charge of the sale of the lots, and some have already been disposed of to Reverend James F. Bullitt, the assistant rector of Christ Church, who lives at 380 Mount Auburn Street. That address is at Jerry's Landing. Based on the description, articles, the Coolidge land at issue is within the red arrows. Fine homes were built on that property. However, a vast amount of that acreage is owned by two private schools. One is the Buckingham Brown and Nichols School, and the other is the Shady Hill School. I was surprised to find that from 1857 to 1907, 23 people died from suicide. 21 died before 1889. Before the 1960s, their being buried in consecrated ground was contrary to what I was taught during my Catholic education. I was greatly relieved that kindly priests allowed their burials in a Catholic cemetery. Two other acts of compassion by a mother's love. In 1910, a 17-year-old girl died as a result of an abortion. Although her parents and other family members are buried at St. Benedict Cemetery in West Roxbury, she was buried at Catholic Mount Auburn. Her upright poured concrete grave marker appears to be homemade. Her last name is on the top. It is written with small chips of white tiles. It is shown on the next slide. I speculate that her mother had no control over her burial location. When I am at the cemetery, I try to visit that lonely grave. In 1878, a 12-year-old boy stabbed and killed his 15-year-old brother. The murderer died in 1890 and was buried by his mother, who died in 1902. The family is buried together. Another example of compassion and forgiveness by his mother. William Caron, age 40, a gas fitter, resided with his wife near the Tremont House at Nahant. In the afternoon, the sound of a gun was heard coming from his sleeping room. Upon entering the room, Caron was found dead in his bed. The shot was fired from a double-barreled gun and struck him in the heart. The newspapers reported that he was loading his gun. The record of death notes a suicide. Mary Mulvihill Cooney's suicide was one of many that occurred while in the custody of the police. During the afternoon of June 27, 1871, Mary was arrested and taken to the 9th Precinct. She was 40 years old, a widow, and had been under the influence of liquor for some time. She was to have been in court in the morning. She was born in Ireland, and married for the first time in February 1870. At the time of her arrest, she had with her a child, 3 months old, toward whom she manifested ill temper. About 6:30, Sergeant Briggs went to the cell and found that she had hung herself with a small cord tied to the railing of the upper bunk in the cell. The little waif was sent to the Chardon Street home. Patrick Dillon, age 31, resided in Somerville. He was employed as a trucker but had been discharged for intemperance. The Boston Post reported that he committed suicide a few days after being fired by taking laudanum. He left a wife and 4 small children, the oldest a cripple. That child, Mary, was 11 when her father died. She died from hip disease in 1873, 6 years after her father's death. Another child, Nellie, was 6 when Patrick died. She also died in 1873, 3 months before Mary, from typhoid fever. In 1858, Patrick and his wife lost an infant son to convulsions. His wife died in 1906. On March 1, 1864, at age 26, Patrick enlisted as a private and enlisted in Company E, Massachusetts 28th Infantry Regiment. He mustered out on June 30, 1865 at Washington, D.C. His service record notes that he had been wounded. Cornelius Martin was arrested for drunkenness and taken to Station 5, where he was locked up in a cell. The officer noted that Martin did not appear to be out of his mind. Martin was not heard from until 3:30 in the afternoon when a jail officer looked in through the bars of the door and saw the body of the prisoner hanging lifeless, suspended on the wall by the braces he had worn. The body was immediately cut down and vain efforts made to restore life. Medical examiner Draper was sent for and after viewing the remains, sent him to the morgue. Martin was about 50 years of age and had always been accustomed to use liquor when he became very despondent. He was the driver of the whole team and left a widow and several children. A young daughter predeceased him. He served the Navy during the Civil War. 5 relatives are buried in his lot. John McCoy's body was found March 23, 1883, in the Charles River on the Brighton side. His death record noted suicide by drowning. He was 37 years old, single, and resided 53, Brattle Street, Cambridge. He was a blacksmith by trade and had been missing from his home since December 21. At age 19, on August 3, 1864, he enlisted as a private in Company I of the Massachusetts 24th Infantry Regiment. He was reported as being wounded in the war. An infant brother, who died in 1857, is buried with him. John O'Brien, age 47, was married and resided at 19 City Point Court. On October 9, 1907, his body was found at home by his 15-year-old daughter, Frances, when she came home from school. He had cut his throat with a straight razor. It was reported to be a ghastly scene. John J. White was a clothing cutter in Boston. He committed suicide by jumping overboard from the ferryboat heading from Swampscott. The newspaper headline read, "His girl proved false." The article went on to say, he lived with his widowed mother, a poor old lady who goes about on crutches in her modest, Nard Wharf, East Boston. His mother told the newspaper that he was one of the best boys that ever lived, one of the brightest and smartest young men you would meet. He made a good living and lived pleasantly, however, he always drank some. It was his only fault. He drank more lately than ever before. Passionately fond of a handsome 24-year-old woman, and this accounts for his doing away with himself. Her name was Jenny Lundy. He had known her for a long time as they worked at the same business. He was very jealous and cared greatly for Miss Lundy and didn't want her to speak to any other young man. He was dead gone her and she pretended to cure the world for him. They went down to the Isles of Shoals twice together. The board was high there, and it cost John $40 or $50 each time. Then the girl went off and married a shoemaker, not letting John knew about it until many months after the wedding. For a year after it, he was unable to get a good sleep a single night. He lay awake and thought about it and worried. In a few months he took the matter to heart so seriously that his head became bald by worriment. She was a country girl, with a pretty appearance and complexion. She was of medium height and rather stout. She told me several times she didn't care anything for John. He is buried with his mother and infant brother. Reverend Manasses P. Doherty was born in 1816 in Ireland. He collapsed and died on July 25, 1877, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He came to dominate the expansion of Catholicism in the Boston area for 30 years. Seeing the necessity for a church in the west part of Cambridge, he built St. Peter's on Concord Avenue in 1848. As one of the frontier churches of Boston, St. Peter's extended over much of the northwest metropolitan area. The original parish limits enclosed Belmont, Lincoln, Lexington, Bedford, Medford, Malden, and Somerville west of Dayton. From St. Peter's, Father Doherty built so many parishes, the last of which was St. Paul, that he received the sobriquet Founder of Churches. The continuing arrival and integration of immigrants was not always easy. What was perceived as an Irish flood completely changed the landscape of those who had known the village of Old Cambridge. Patty jokes appeared in some newspapers, and differences between natives and foreign-born were obvious. Conservatives in the Old Village were petitioning to withdraw from the rest of Cambridge, as were the residents of East Cambridge. But Catholic growth was so rapid that Father Doherty planned to erect a church in Harvard's neighborhood. The Catholics within a few years erected a church at East Cambridge and purchased 5 acres to build another church about 1 mile west from the university's buildings. At that time, 25% of the population of Boston was Catholic. As Catholics were beginning to surround the college, Catholics were also beginning to emerge from it. After years of anti-papism, Harvard provided some of the clergy who welcomed the first Catholic church, St. Paul's, in Harvard Square. Before the building of a new St. Paul's, several blocks away, it was at the site of the now Holyoke Center. References to the St. Paul's Church in its first 50 years regularly the famed Father Manasses Doherty as the founder, and tablets in the vestibule of both St. Peter's and Old St. Paul's marked the memory of the pioneer priest whose funeral in 1877 drew 3,000 mourners. The inscription on his monument, "Sacred to the memory of Reverend Manasses P. Doherty, pastor of St. Peter's, Cambridge, died July 25, 1877, aged 61 years." This monument was erected by his parishioners of St. Peter's Church in grateful remembrance for his love and devoted services to their pastor in the vineyard of the Lord. Requisite and pace. Reverend Thomas H. Bannon was born in Boston, to Irish-born parents. He died from phthisis, in Boston, on January 11, 1871. Phthisis is a progressively wasting or consumptive condition, especially pulmonary tuberculosis. Many clergy and physicians, who, nature of their vocations came in close contact with their charges, died from communicable diseases. Father Bannon was ordained to the priesthood in the seminary at Quebec and then served in the Springfield diocese. He continued his ministrations until the spring of 1870, when he was forced, by ill health, to resign his charge. He died the following November. His monument notes his parents' names. Reverend Edward B. Callahan was born at Chelsea, Massachusetts, June 25, 1907, to Irish-born parents. He attended St. Anselm's College and graduated from St. John's Seminary in 1936. During his 48 years as a priest, he served at 14 parishes within the Boston Archdiocese. He died on December 23, 1984, in the West End, Boston, at the Regina Clary Home for Retired Priests. His final parish was St. Michael's, Avon, from which he retired November 1, 1976. Reverend William J. Denvere was born in 1839, at Charlestown, Massachusetts. His father was the undertaker I have previously mentioned as the straw buyer of the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery in 1854. He died at his parents' Charlestown residence from phthisis on September 1, 1885. His final parish was Star of the Sea Church in Beverly, Massachusetts, where he was the pastor. Father Denvere was a graduate of Holy Cross College and the seminary in France. He was ordained in 1862 in Rome. His was one of the largest funerals ever in the Bunker Hill district. It was held at St. Mary's Church. More than 100 priests were on the altar, including Archbishop Williams and Vicar General Byrne of St. Joseph's Church of Boston. Father Denvere was of a delicate constitution, and the work of attending to 3 churches, in a large parish, was very laborious. Reverend Joseph Lynch Early was born in Boston on January 21, 1881. He graduated from Boston College in 1901, and St. John's Seminary in 1905. He was a brilliant student and was sent to Rome for further education. Upon his return from Rome, he did postgraduate work at the Catholic University. His first parish was St. John the Evangelist at Hopkinton, Massachusetts. He also served at St. Agnes, Arlington, Massachusetts, and St. Mary's at Winchester. Already a priest in the Boston Archdiocese, he entered the Maryknoll Order in 1918. On March 6, 1934, he died at the home of his sister in Brookline, Massachusetts. He had been ill for 10 years. Reverend James Farron was born in 1824, at Culdaff, County Donegal, Ireland. On November 7, 1858, he died from consumption in Boston. He was serving at St. John's Church in East Cambridge. His death occurred 16 days before the death of his pastor, Reverend Lawrence. He was Reverend Carroll's assistant for about a year, but all of that time he was in poor health. In early August 1858, he had returned to Cambridge from Florida. He was visited by a number of his friends at the house of his sister. They presented him with a purse containing $400 in gold. It believed that he had gone to Florida to improve his health. Reverend John B. Halloran was born in 1849, County Cork, Ireland, and died on August 8, 1902, at Old Orchard, Maine. He had traveled there for a rest, as he had heart disease. He was a graduate of Boston College and St. John's Seminary, at Troy, New York. He was ordained in 1878 and was then appointed a curate at St. Augustine's Church, South Boston, where he remained for 14 years. Father Halloran was known for his sterling qualities, his untiring energies, noble character, and devotion to God and his people. He was respected by all who knew him. Reverend John Joseph Heffernan was born, on July 25, 1827, in Ireland. He died, from arteriosclerosis, on November 25, 1905. He was pastor of St. Mark's Church at Sheepshead, Long Island, and was one of the best-known priests in New York State. St. Mark's was established as a separate and distinct parish with Reverend John J. Heffernan as its first pastor. By the turn of the century, he was credited with increasing the parish enrollment to 1,300 people, with 200 children attending Sunday school. Reverend Nicholas Steenbacher, Society of Jesus, was born in Prussia in 1796. He died in Boston, Massachusetts, on February 14, 1862. Beginning in 1838, he was a missionary to eastern Pennsylvania. He was a circuit priest and founded several churches, including St. Mary's in Erie, Pennsylvania. Reverend Francis X. Brannigan was born in Ireland, in about 1832. After a long illness, he died at Cambridge on June 25, 1861. Before his death, he purchased the land for St. Mary's Church in Central Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts. He is buried in the priest's lot along with 2 priests and a deacon, whose markers are raised tables in the form of an altar. Each has a chalice engraved at the top. Except for Father Brannigan's tablet top, which has a crack, the water turns red, surrounding the chalice, when it rains. I expect that there are metal filings in the basin. Reverend Lawrence G. Carroll was born at Ireland in 1813. He died, at Cambridge, on November 23, 1858, at age 44, from gangrene of the lungs. From 1851 to 1858, he served at St. John's Church, now known as the Sacred Heart of Jesus in East Cambridge from 1851 to his death. He was remembered as one of the kindest and most genial of men, who filled the atmosphere about him with his cheerful presence. Reverend Michael A. Kelleher was born in Ireland in 1846. He died 10 days after ordination, of consumption, at Cambridge, Massachusetts, on December 12, 1872. He graduated from Holy Cross College in 1869. There was only a single-line death notice listed in the local Cambridge newspaper. Deacon Michael J. Shea was born in Ireland, on September 10, 1839. He died from consumption, at Cambridge, Massachusetts, on October 22, 1864. His memorial marker was presented by his mother. Captain John Joseph Cochrane was born in Boston, on June 24, 1853. He died from typhoid fever, at St. Luke's Hospital, in New York City, on August 6, 1891. He studied medicine in New York. Next he graduated, he spent a short time at Bellevue Hospital and practiced in New York and afterward at Milford, Massachusetts. In 1876 he acted as a physician for the Cunard Line on one of their ocean steamers. In 1877, he entered the United States Army as an assistant surgeon and was first stationed on Bedloes Island, New York. He also at Fort Wingate, New Mexico, Fort Garland, Colorado, the Presidio at San Francisco, and Fort Adams, Newport, Rhode Island, where he remained until the fall of 1890. His final posting was at Eagle Pass, Texas, where he was taken ill. Lawrence H. Collier was born in Cambridge, in 1868. He died at 212 South Street, Jamaica Plain, on September 15, 1925. After graduating from Harvard Medical School in 1891, he practiced allopathy, that is the treatment of patients by utilizing science-based, modern medicine. For more than 20 years, he was known as one of Jamaica Plain's best-known physicians and a prominent member of many Catholic organizations. In 1893, he was appointed a medical examiner on the Second Board of Pension Examiners. Simon B. Conlin was born in Cambridge in 1861. He died, at age 26, from phthisis, in Somerville, Massachusetts, May 19, 1888. He was not married. He was a graduate of Holy Cross College in Worcester, and the Harvard Medical School, and was a young man universally esteemed. His mother died in February 1888, from pneumonia. His sister died in 1892, at age 25, and his father died in 1902, both from phthisis. They are buried together in an unmarked grave. John J. Connolly M.D. was born in Boston, in 1853. He died, in Boston. April 16, 1876, of phthisis. He was not married. At age 22, he graduated from the Boston University Medical School with the class of 1875, having previously graduated from the Boston Latin School. He attended a year at Harvard. Although long an invalid, he was a thorough student and in all respects, a promising young man. John B. Curtis was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in 1868. He died, on October 1, 1898, at his home, in East Cambridge, after a long illness, apoplexy, which is either a cerebral hemorrhage or a stroke. He was not married. He was a graduate of Boston College and Harvard Medical School. During his last 6 years, his practice had been largely in the Winter Hill section of the Somerville district. Lieutenant Thomas W. Flatley was born in approximately 1845, in Ireland. He died from typhoid fever, at Canton, Massachusetts, on September 6, 1873. At the time of his death, he was a medical officer in the 9th Massachusetts Regiment. He did not serve in the Civil War. He was not married. More than 2,000 or more men and women attended his funeral in Canton. Many of the mourners took the train to the cemetery. Dr. Flatley was a graduate of Harvard University and a member of the Massachusetts Medical Society. Though a young man, he had acquired an extensive practice. He was held in high esteem and was loved and respected by all who knew him. He is buried with an older brother. Thomas H. Germain M.D. was born in Dublin, Ireland, in approximately 1778. His record of death notes that he was a physician. On March 28, 1862, he died, at 8, Somerset Street, Boston, from old age and a fracture of the thigh. He was a widower. John Argillo Gregg M.D. was born in the Fort Hill district of Boston, Massachusetts, on January 11, 1849. He died at Massachusetts General Hospital, of cardiac failure, on March 14, 1905. He was not married. His parents were born in Ireland. For 39 years, he was a well-known physician of Somerville. He was educated at Boston College and Niagara University, and received his medical degree from Dartmouth. Jeremiah John Reardon M.D. was born in Ireland, in 1849. He died of brain inflammation, on January 22, 1882, in Boston, Massachusetts. His parents were born in Ireland. He was married at the time of his death. His wife is not buried with him. He was a graduate of Harvard Medical School in 1876. Morris Buckley was born in Ireland, and died on May 12, 1862, at age 26. He was a mariner, lived on Wharf Street, and was single. On Saturday night, May 10, 1862, Officer James T. Hill, a police officer of District 2, arrested a man named Thomas McCarty, who was disturbing the peace with noisy and drunken demonstrations of various sorts. McCarty was taken to the station house and locked up. Officer Hill returned to his beat. While passing at the head of Wharf Street, he heard a disturbance. He proceeded down the latter street, where he found a number of McCarty's friends, as it since appears, got up a sham affray, for the purpose of entrapping Mr. Hill. The officer warned the parties to cease and disperse. This they not only refused to do but at once assumed a most insolent and bellicose manner. Officer Hill attempted to arrest a young man named James Downey. This was the signal for onslaught upon the officer, who was seized, thrown down, and beaten. They wrestled his club from him and they beat his head, probably fracturing his skull. The club is of hardwood and was broken in the process of mauling the officer's head. They also jumped upon his face with the heels of their boot, cutting and bruising in a shocking manner. Finding himself at the mercy of the mob, fearing that they intended to murder him, he drew his revolver and warned them that he would fire unless they dispersed. The mob disregarded the warning and attempted to take the weapon from his grasp. He then fired a shot in the air, but this failed to intimidate the mob. The officer attempted to stand on feet to escape. After running a short distance, he was overtaken and was again beaten. He repeated his warning that unless they dispersed, he would shoot them. But this did no good. A man named Morris Buckley attempted, with great force, to again get possession of the revolver. Officer Hill, whose strength had become expended, fired a second charge. Mr. Buckley was hit in his left temple. He fell to the pavement and died in about 10 minutes. The body of Buckley was conveyed to the station house in a wagon and thence was carried to the dead house in North Grove Street. He was 37 years of age and unmarried. He had been employed for the past 3 years as a deckhand on board the steamer Lewiston. A jury of inquest was empaneled and returned no bill of indictment, noting that Morris Buckley and others were committing upon Hill a murderous assault, by which Officer Hill was severely and dangerously injured about the head, back, and chest. We are of the opinion that the act was in self-defense, and was justifiable. A boy named Claffey, age 15, was on Lincoln Street, playing with a handgun in the presence of a group of boys. Dennis Curran, who lived at 30 Lincoln Street, was apart from the group and was shot in the side. He was 2 years 11 months old. Claffey ran away. The coroner's jury returned a verdict that Dennis Curran came to his death about 3:30 Tuesday afternoon, February 28, 1871, from the effects of a wound received on the previous day by the careless discharge of a pistol in the hands of William Claffey. The evidence indicated that the Claffey boy purchased a pistol and 100 rounds of Colt cartridges from a gun shop square. His purpose was to amuse himself, as well as his comrades, by firing a series of indiscriminate shots. That act resulted in the death of Dennis Curran. The jury believed that the proprietor of the store, who, for a few dollars, placed in the hands of a thoughtless boy, was the means of doing such a harmful. The proprietor deserved the severe censure. His expression of regret could be insufficient for sad consequences. Dennis appears not to be buried with family members. 23-year-old Edward Egan was arrested and charged with inflicting injuries upon his twin sister, Elizabeth Egan, that resulted in her death. They paid a visit to their mothers at her residence on North Grove Street. Edward went to his mother's bureau and was examining the contents of some of the drawers when his sister told him to stop. Edward seized a bat and struck his sister on the side of the head, knocking her down on the floor. That blow was followed by several others. It is said she was rather hastily and privately buried in the Catholic cemetery near Mount Auburn. It was reported that previous to the beating she was in perfect health. Her body was disinterred and brought back to the deceased was quite a pretty woman and was married several years ago to a youth of 14 years who soon after died. She resumed her maiden name. Egan was brought before the court yesterday but waived examination and was committed. The investigation of the circumstances attending the death of Elizabeth Egan resulted in bringing to light another chapter of drunkenness and brutality of which many are discovered in our midst. The woman though but 23, was a drunkard and assaulted her brother, who then beat her severely with a slab of wood, and as a result, she died. The jury of the inquest returned a verdict of conformity with these facts, finding her brother guilty of death. She is not buried with her brother. One of the most frightful atrocities committed in this city for many years occurred on October 17, 1857. It resulted in the death of John Hilton and the severe wounding of 2 others. At about 5 o'clock, brothers Henry L. Sutton and George J. Sutton and Captain Sylvester Bacon of the schooner Galena was considerably intoxicated and went into a yard connected with the boarding house of Mrs. Fagan, 44, High Street. They were committing a nuisance directly in sight of the windows where female boarders were sitting. Mrs. Fagan informed John Donovan, one of the boarders, who went out and remonstrated the men for the impropriety of actions. According to the testimony of Mrs. Fagan and others, Henry L. Sutton struck Donovan. Then John Hilton, also known as the Limerick Boy, came to Donovan's assistance. The 5 of them were immediately engaged in a general fight, falling over the barrels, with Donovan at a disadvantage. Mrs. Fagan saw Henry Sutton unbutton the top of his coat and thrust his hand into his breast as if about to draw something. Donovan ran down the yard, pursued by Bacon and Henry Sutton. Donovan ran into the kitchen, bleeding profusely. Henry Sutton ran down High Street to Liverpool Wharf. There Sutton turned round and faced his pursuers. Hilton struck him with a cane with sufficient force to break it, saying, "What made you stab my cousin?" Whereupon Sutton struck a blow with a knife, a weapon with a blade of 5 inches long, which entered at the neck with a downward direction, and perforated the lungs. Hilton immediately fell, and was carried into the apothecary store of W. C. Pierce. Dr. Hartnett was next sent for. He promptly appeared and tendered all aid in his power to the dying man, for Hilton was dying. He soon died at that location. Hilton had acquired some reputation as a boxer or sparring man, but was generally considered to be an industrious person. He was about 28 years of age, had recently been divorced from his wife, and left 2 young children. Hilton, it is said, was to have soon married a person more congenial to the tastes than his first wife. At the funeral, the services of the Catholic Church were conducted by Reverend Mr. Rogers of the Free Street Church and were very largely attended. High Street was thronged with people, and great excitement existed among the Irish population. Everyone gave the deceased a good name. His remains were taken to the Mount Auburn Catholic Cemetery for interment and were followed by about 20 carriages. Henry L. Sutton placed on trial for manslaughter, for causing the death of John Hilton, by stabbing him. Self-defense was the defense raised by the defendant's counsel. On December 3, 1857, and after an absence of about half an hour, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. John Hilton is buried in an unmarked grave with his daughter Emma, who died June 5, 1858, at the Boston Orphan Asylum of marasmus, a wasting disease. Another daughter survived and was also placed at the orphanage. As a result of this project, a direct descendant and I have corresponded. John Hilton's daughter, Mary Frances, was adopted. She, married, had 2 children, and died in 1907. Dennis Hogan, age 22, born in Ireland, died July 16, 1863, at the Cooper Street Armory, was located in the North End of Boston. 8 people were killed, including 3 children. He was shot by Union troops during a draft riot that occurred at Boston and New York, a week following the Battle of Gettysburg, where many Irish, as well as other poor soldiers, suffered a very high casualty rate. A point of outrage was the new change in the conscription laws that allowed a man to escape military service by paying $300 for a substitute. Those of lesser means were prejudiced by the new law. He is buried with his mother and 2 married sisters who died before age 26. On February 19, 1861, a difficulty occurred at 164 North Street between two women named Catherine Farron and Ellen Maloney. Miss Farron stabbed Miss Maloney in the left breast with a knife. It was a severe wound and it was proposed to send her to the hospital. On account of her injuries, she was allowed to remain at the house. The wound was not considered dangerous by the physician, however. Inflammation set in, and she died on March 19. It was supposed that Miss Maloney's death resulted from the wound inflicted a month ago. Catherine Farron was arrested and the following day was bound over for trial. She waived the reading of the complaint of willful murder and was committed for a week for examination. An autopsy was made of Miss Maloney. It was said that Miss Farron was a well-appearing woman, about 30 years of age, and the cause of the difficulty between her and the deceased was jealousy on the part of both. Catherine Farron was charged with manslaughter. She was acquitted of the charge of manslaughter, but convicted of assault and battery with a knife and sentenced to 8 months in the House of Correction. On January 2, 1882, William H. McLaughlin Jr. was shot by police officer Clark, in his family's home on South Street. An inquest was held as to the circumstances of his death. McLaughlin's family and the officer were represented by legal counsel. Mary McLaughlin, 16 years of age, sister of the deceased, testified that on the day in question, she had a little quarrel with the brother at supper time. She said her brother struck her 3 times because she did not mind her mother. Her brother had never struck her before that evening. She then went out to the corner of South Street, near Lincoln and Beach Streets, where she found 2 officers. She asked them to go to her house and quell a disturbance. The officers Clark and Whitman followed her to the house. They all hesitated on the threshold. When she tried to open the door, which was ajar, her brother closed it against her. She then went away and took her place beside Officer Whitman. Her brother opened the door and said, "I'll fix anybody if they come in here." William opened the door halfway, and seeing his sister, said, "I'll fix you," then threw a broom at her. Mary said that he had nothing in his hand but a broom. Officer Clark then fired and William said he was shot. Clark went into the room and shook McLaughlin. Someone in the crowd opened his clothes and ascertained that McLaughlin had been shot. His sister said that the very minute the broom was thrown at her, the officer fired the shot. A neighbor, Mr. Clifford, a printer, testified that Mrs. McLaughlin had said, "Willie dear, the officers are here," and McLaughlin said to hell with the officers. McLaughlin appeared at the open front door with a lemon squeezer in his left hand. The second time the door was open he heard McLaughlin say some obscene remark to his sister. That was immediately followed by a pistol shot. After the shooting, when the people were in the room bending over the boy, Officer Whitman said to Officer Clark, "I didn't think you were going to shoot." 3 other independent witnesses, Jenny Gleason, Patrick Coffey, and George Bush, corroborated the witnesses' testimony. Jeremiah McLaughlin Jr., 13 years old, brother of the deceased, and his father William Sr., also corroborated the testimony. Finally, Kate McLaughlin, mother of the boy, agreed with the other witnesses and addressed the lemon squeezer. She had it in her hand when her son was shot. On February 12, 1882, the Boston Sunday Globe reported that the grand jury returned no bill of indictment from the death of young McLaughlin. I am an Army veteran and served from 1968 to 1971. During my last 3 months of service, I was in charge of a 16-person military honor burial guard. We rendered final honors at the Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery. That would include veterans as well as those who died on active duty. We also traveled to various communities in eastern Kansas and the entire state of Iowa. Those trips were usually for soldiers who were killed in Vietnam. When we were traveling, the Army Reserves rendered the honors at the National Cemetery. 53 years later, as the person who presented the flag, the faces of family members, parents, wives, and young children remain with me. On the right side of this slide is the old pole. It appears to be very old, made out of piping, and was bent and rusted. The old picture indicates what I found after a winter's long season. The flags rotting on the ground disturbed me. In 2022, after 10 years of researching the cemetery, I purchased a new 20-foot flagpole. My friends at the Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is shown in the background over the concrete wall, set the pole for me. Members of the Private Charles J. Shutt Detachment of the Watertown Marine Corps League rendered honors on Memorial Day 22. The WatertownNews.org posted this picture along with a small narrative. There are 149 veterans of the Civil War buried or memorialized at the Catholic Mount Auburn Cemetery, as well as 5 from World War I, 3 from World War II, and 2 from other eras. Lieutenant Colonel James Fleming was buried in an unmarked grave. He enlisted on October 4, 1861, as a sergeant, in Company B, 28th Regiment Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry. He was wounded 4 times during the regiment's many campaigns. In civilian life, he was an upholsterer. At age 23, through his leadership, bravery, and attrition, he was given command of the regiment. He died at age 27, on May 2, 1869. His cause of death was the effects of wounds and exposure while in U.S. service. The following was sent to me by Sandy Barnard. He is a Civil War historian and has written several books about the 28th Massachusetts Regiment. According to the series of documents in his pension file at the National Archives, Fleming was seriously ill with tuberculosis in October 1868. His doctor recommended he leave Boston for his health. He traveled to California, but for some reason undoubtedly related to health, in April, he took a steamer hoping to reach Lee in Charlestown. When it stopped, in New York on May 1, 1869, Fleming was even more seriously ill. When they took him off the boat and to New York Hospital, he was barely alive. He died at 11 a.m. on May 2. For several years I worked to have a government marker placed on his grave. I was successful just before Memorial Day 2022. My great thanks to the United States Veterans Administration. During this era, all vital statistical information noted various terms to identify African Americans. Those terms included colored, C, and CP. The following are the people buried whose names carried such a notation. Zachariah Bean died of senility in Boston on August 23, 1882, at age 69. He was born in St. Mary's County, Maryland, and was a mariner. He was a Civil War veteran. George Andrew Bean, Zachariah's son, died of consumption, at age 2 months, 2 days, on September 1, 1861. His mother was noted as being born in Ireland. He was baptized at St. Mary's Church, Charlestown, on June 29, 1859. His parents' names were Zachariah Bean and Elizabeth Doyle. James F. Herbert died from convulsions on May 7, 1865. At age 3 months, born in Boston, Massachusetts. His father Daniel was born in Washington, D.C., and his mother Caroline was born in the West Indies. Rufus Freeman died August 14, 1866, at age 49 years. The cause of death was listed as unknown. The 1855 census of Massachusetts lists Margaret as his wife, born in Scotland. Margaret Anderson is buried with Rufus Freeman. She died January 18, 1876, age 45, of phthisis. Robert Crump, an unmarried man, died June 19, 1863, at age 31, of phthisis, at Boston, Massachusetts. He was a barber and was born in Virginia. His father is noted as Abner and his mother were born in Virginia. Robert was baptized by Father O'Reilly of St. Joseph's Church, Boston, on June 16. 1863, his baptismal records. In the left margin, June 16, Robert Crump infidel, followed by, I baptized this day Robert age 31 years, son of Abner Crump and Ann Harris, infidels. His sponsor was Sarah Crump. He died in less than 1 hour. Catherine Gill, a widow, died April 4, 1803, at age 90, of old age. She was born in the Spanish Islands. Mary Flanagan purchased the grave on the occasion of Catherine's death. The burial book notes, Reverend Williams will pay for the burial. The City of Boston records of deaths for the year 1863 notes that Philip Fow, age 50, on November 1, died at the Massachusetts General Hospital. He was unmarried, a servant, and born in Africa. He is noted as being buried at Watertown. None of the 4 other Watertown cemeteries note him as buried there. Although his name is not in the Catholic Cemetery's burial book, I him to this cemetery and findagrave.com to publicize his burial. As are all of my charts, this slide is segmented into 2 eras. During the first era, 1854 to 1881, Boston those accounted for 49% of the births. During the next era, from 1882 to 1920 noted that Boston births set down to 19%. It appears that immigrants from the first era have moved to the emerging suburbs. The next era notes that Cambridge's was as up almost 400% and Somerville's 300%. I chose the year 1881 as a demarcation to compare 2 different eras as I felt a shift in the age of mortality. This chart appears to validate my observation. As I noted before, 99.5% of the lots were sold before mid-1864. That was 10 years after the first burial on April 11, 1854. This chart notes a large shift in the mean age of death. Living conditions may have gotten better, but the 10-year limited time of purchasing lots, after 1864, stopped any new owners, of childbearing years, from purchasing lots. I expect that accounts for a portion of the shift.